Hey, Entity. Yeah, this is the freak. Yes, that's exactly what this is. But you know what? It's 2 minutes after, so you missed the giveaway. Sorry about that. Hold on one second. Let me just check something here real quick. Um, yes, Ella, you are so welcome to. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I'm talking to Ella. She's talking to me elsewhere. I misunderstood what you were asking me, and absolutely, I will bring you on. One second. Sorry, I misunderstood. And you can ask me some questions while we go through this. So let me just get this set up. I'm getting better at getting this stuff going. All right. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, I won't say anything, Mal. Can you hear me? All right. Okay, cool. Okay. So let me wait for Ella to join me, and then I'm going to do something kind of cool with you guys. Hold on a second. Okay, let me see how I do this. Uh, hey, Ella.
Hey, Chris.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, doing very good. I know you guys would not have noticed this unless I pointed it out, but I spilled something on myself while getting a hamburger for lunch, and I'm very upset because I love this hoodie and I don't want it to be dirty. So I'm having a bit of a meltdown over that, but it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I'll survive. It's actually cold and not cold, but it's like cold in Texas right now because of the storms. There's like crazy storms going on. So um anyway, so I think we got a tiny group here today. I know it's kind of at a interesting time. We wanted to try different times, so we thought let's give this one a shot. So so we've got Mal and Entity here. Um and Entity's asking if I can send the cold over to listen. This is very short lived. It was like 100 degrees literally the other day, like 2 days ago, and now it's like 70. There's a 30-point swing here in Texas. So
Gross.
yeah, it's pretty bad. So what we're gonna do is today. So I was gonna do for this special session today. I wanted to give you guys Entity. You may not know this. I know that Mal knows this, but I spent many years as the head of original anime and entertainment for Funimation. So I used to produce anime movies and TV shows, and I used to produce, well, I still do, like television and movies. I don't have one going on right now, but I still do that kind of stuff where I produce movies and television and things of that nature. And I wanted to show you guys the secrets to storytelling. And I was going to show you this graph that I put together from all the different sources that I've learned from. I've read so many books that on this subject that I've applied to my movie making and to my book writing that I kind of wanted to show you what makes a good story. So, Ella, it's good that you're here because you and I can kind of bounce off, and you can ask me any questions you may have, and share with me what's going on in there with our little tiny little group here today. Very tiny. This is a very cute group today. So, um, so let's start with this. So first, let me start off by saying if you're interested in story writing, especially, I'm looking at you, RPG, Flux Fantasy RPG players. Um, you absolutely should study. There's a couple books. There's one book that I always highly recommend. It's called Story Engineering. That's a really, really good book. Oh, actually, hold on. I got it right here. Let me pull it up and I'll show you.
I appreciate that Chris is like a hard book, physical book person because ebooks are great, but it's all. I have a big collection. I'm a big book collector, so I always like when people have the physical copy of books.
Right. There's nothing like having like the physical books, right? And so it's it's something about it. Like you feel more legit too when you have like all your books everywhere, you know? Um,
Hmm.
like one thing before I show you the book, what the line I think in cinema that I most relate to is the line from, have you seen Lord of the Rings, right? The Lord of the Rings movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you remember when um, Bilbo, like in the first movie, when Gandalf comes in and he's like, after the birthday party and Bilbo's getting ready to leave, and he's like,
Mhm.
I can finally, he wants to get away from his family. He's like, I can finally have time to write my book.
Mhm.
That's that I've never related so much with a line than that particular one. I love that line so much because I know how he feels, you know. Um, but anyways, I wanted to suggest a couple of these books. These books have followed me um, in my career, and I highly recommend them. The first one is this Story Engineering, and it's by Larry Brooks. I highly recommend this book. This is a fantastic book that is really um, breaks down, I think, in the simplest way I've ever seen, like the big tent poles um, of has on the big tent poles of storytelling. So highly recommend this one. The Hero's Journey, which is documented with the hero within. This is an excellent book. Highly. Have you read this, Ella? You read this book? Yeah, these are
Oh yeah.
great books. These are really good books. This one's a great one. This one I love. This one's actually by a YouTuber. Have you heard of this one? On hold on, let it focus. On writing and world building. Have you seen this?
I don't think so.
This is a really good one. It's by Timothy Hickson. Highly recommend this book. He's got like 3 of these books so far. Really, really. I think Ella, you would love this. You would absolutely love these. Um, there's also a couple resource books that I would recommend too. 20 Master Plots. This is actually a really good book because there's another book like 20 Master Characters or something. These are great books that kind of
Yeah.
have the main template stories and what the, you know, like the quest, the, you know, the the quest, the adventure, the pursuit, rescue, escape, revenge, rivalry, underdog. Like it goes through all the different types of stories and the kind of things that those kind of stories have in them to help you
Mhm.
know what makes a good story in that. Like, I highly recommend this. And one more, uh, I'm not gonna climb my bookshelf to go get it, but there's 2 more. Um, Story by Robert McKee. It's a very famous like script writing book. Highly recommend that one. Do you know that one, Ella? Have you read that one?
A little.
Yeah, it's more dense than these others. It's like very mechanical and very dense, but it's such a good one. And finally, Creativity Inc. by
Yeah.
Catmull. You like that one, right? That was a good one. So I
I
highly
have that
recommend those.
one.
Oh, you have that one? That's a great one. I love that. I love that book. It's a great, great book. And so I highly recommend those books. And if you look through mine, I like highlight like crazy. I think mine are all highlighted up, notes and everything. Like I'm always like highlighting, and I've become a real geek when it comes to storytelling because it's funny once you learn and understand how it works and what makes a good story, it takes all the mystery out of it and it makes
Yeah.
writing easier and more effective. And in a future session, I'll also show you guys how I do the outlining of my books, for example, because I'm very methodical in the way I do it, and I actually use the method that I'm going to show you in a moment, of how to break down a story so that it will fit into an outline. I get made fun of a lot too. Made fun of is not the right word. I get poked at because I use spreadsheets a lot for all my planning and my. But it works. It works for me. You know, I say use what works for you. So, do you have any books that you want to recommend, Ella, or were these pretty exhaustive?
Oh, those are the ones.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
very good. So I highly recommend those. So let's look over this little chart. Okay, let me see if I got the text set up because I fixed it. I'm going to push a button and something good is supposed to happen. All right. And if it doesn't, I want you to know that it worked before I went live. I just
Okay.
want to be clear. Okay, ready? So let's try this. There we go. Oh wait, now I gotta add you. Hold on. Hold on a second. Now I gotta add you to it. Uh, oh, there you are. Okay, now you're on. There's Ella with us. Okay. Um, so we're gonna go over. So this particular structure is a combination of the hero's journey and what you'll find in a lot of the other books, especially the story engineering book that I was sharing earlier. And I put this little graph together. Actually, I did this when I was at Funimation because I used to pass this thing around to my story team because I used to have a team of writers who worked for me and other producers, and we would always check against this. It's not meant to be like an absolute science where everything has to happen exactly at this point, but in general, a good story follows these kind of milestones. And when you do that, you'll find that your story is really is um, more captivating because the truth is we are taught from very little what good stories are because we consume so much entertainment. And this structure, I guarantee you already know it inherently. You just don't know the names of the things in it, right? And that's important. What you call like, for example, one of the most famous parts that you always know is the moment where all hope is lost, right? That's a very famous moment in a story. Almost every good movie has that moment for a character. And you know it. You recognize it when you come and you know that the movie is about to kick into the third act. When I write, I use this exact model, my spreadsheet. I wish I could show it to you, but it's full of spoilers. And so I can't show it to you right now. And I will do another stream where I prepare it and remove all the stuff so you can kind of see. So I'm just going to walk you through this and explain to you what these things mean. And you guys who are here with us, if you have questions, Ella can let me know. I can't see the comments right now, Ella, because they're hidden by my screen. So if there's anything,
no problem.
I'm not ignoring you guys. I just can't see what you're saying. Okay, so let's start here. So when you see the under here, there's Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And story engineering actually looks at it as a 3 acts like this, but also suggests that really books and stories, in particular novels, are actually 4 acts because the midpoint separates Act 2 into 4. I prefer to use 3 acts with a 2-part second act. So I'll just kind of walk you through what each of these mean, and then I'll kind of walk you through how it works. So when you're reading this, obviously Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, those are the major movements within a story and containing particular elements within that story. So Act 1 is, of course, the setup. There's the inciting incident, and then there's the first plot point. And a story that's a good story is one in which the has 2 important elements. One is that you have the protagonist, who's your hero in your story. Their life has to be turned upside down. Something has to happen, right, that changes their life. Because when you are, I'm gonna draw a little graph here. Hopefully you guys can see this. I'm gonna do a little thing here. When a character starts a story, I'm going to actually draw over this. So imagine this red line is your character. As they're traveling across the story, this is their life, and they hit the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the event in the story that turns things upside down. It's what happens. It's what disrupts the character's life. Technically, what should happen at this point is that a character's life has been turned upside down, so this starts happening, right? Their life is changed, and as they go through these different hurdles in the story, this starts happening. There's the rising action, right? And then they get to all hope is lost. You hit the second plot point. And the idea is that, sorry, that was not meant to be there. Hold on. My mouse slipped. This does not happen. You do not go backwards in time. That does not happen. You go up here, and by the time you reach the climax and the resolution of the story, your character here should be different than here, right? So you started the story down here. So if I draw a dotted line this way, like this, I'm using my mouse, not a pen. That's why this is really crappy. You see where here you are at a higher place, you're at a different place than you were before. The whole point of a standard story is that the hero has gone through a transformation, right? And the story, the narrative transforms the character through the events of the story. But for that to happen, something first has to happen to them that disrupts their life. You know, for example, you could probably look at, like, you can look at any movie, and we'll talk about a couple as examples. If I use, for example, let's say Aladdin, right? And you'll have to kind of remind, I'm using that because I remember he starts off as a, street thief, and he eventually runs into the princess. Am I right? Doesn't he see her in the market? I would argue that that's probably the inciting incident of the story. Or no, wait, hold on. I should have had my examples ready. Hold on. I don't remember the plot of Aladdin that
Yeah, I was
well.
gonna say I don't remember the plot of Aladdin very well either.
Okay, let me think of one that I do remember. Hold on.
Lion King. You remember Lion King, right?
Lion King. So that's a good one. Lion King. So Lion King, I would argue that the inciting incident of Lion King is probably Mufasa's death. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when Mufasa dies, it's a very actually no, that's not true. The Mufasa, yes, it's kind of tricky because
he has two inciting incidents. His inciting incident is when he's like crowned the prince, like the very first moment of his life, because it
well,
changed.
I would argue that him getting his father dying is actually the inciting incident, and then him running, like being told to run away, is the first plot point.
Yeah.
So he leaves, right? And so that's the end of Act 1. So the inciting incident, and the inciting incident can be at any point in the story. Excuse me. No, ignore what I just said. Can happen anywhere within about 10 to 15% of the storyline, right at the beginning. Right. The longer you wait to do your inciting incident, the longer the audience inherently knows, they start getting restless. That's that feeling of when is this movie going to happen? Mm-hmm. And it's the inciting incident that is the cause of that feeling. So when that happens, in the case of Simba, his life got turned upside down. He has to go off and, and change his life. I would argue that the midpoint of the story of The Lion King is probably when Nala comes and finds him. And she tells him that, everything is not what you thought, right? And that the kingdom is fallen into disrepair and all that stuff. That's the midpoint. And the midpoint is a very important part of the story that we'll discuss in a second. And then, of course, you move forward and get to the resolution of the story. So that's just a general, when I drew over this so that you could see how that is. If you're going to be a GM for an RPG, or if you're going to write a novel or what have you, understanding how this makes your life a lot easier. So if I take this little grid off and we look back at what we're looking at here, the important part is each one of these things here is a major tent pole in your story. What is the inciting incident? What is the first plot point? The first plot point is the end of Act 1, and it's what propels you into Act 2. Your first pinch point, that's usually the first encounter with the antagonist of the story. Your midpoint, which is at 50%, is where new information is interjected into the character's knowledge that changes the way they think about what's happening. In the case of The Lion King, when Nala shows up and tells Simba about what's really going on, that Scar is taken over Pride Rock and all this stuff, that's a change in the information. And if you look at these right here, where we've got the stages of heroes development, we call this setup and orphan because you set up the story, obviously. But at the orphan part, the orphan is because, remember, their life has been turned upside down, right? So now they're kind of like, it's not life as they knew it. So they're propelled forward into the wanderer stage of the hero's journey. And during that time, they're trying to find the answers, or, trying to figure things out, or responding to what happened to them, in the first, to the inciting, from the inciting incident. The midpoint indicates the shift in that, where the character goes from wandering and responding to attack mode, and is actively going after the antagonistic forces at this point. So in the case of The Lion King, when Simba learns about what's happening and he realizes he has to go back, he literally goes from wandering to warrior mode, right? To go back and go after Scar and save Pride Rock. The second pinch point is, again, another major encounter with the antagonist. The All Hope is Lost. I can't remember what the All Hope is Lost in The Lion King was, when he goes
to the lake and sees his father.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. I think you're right. I think that's it. I need to rewatch these movies. It's been a while. So, and I'd watched it like a million times as a kid, and I can't remember. The second plot point is usually what happens at the All Hope is Lost is that there is something that happens at the second plot point that injects, it's the final injection of new information that leads people into the third act. It leads the character. It's a plan. It's the path forward. It's how they're going to go have their final encounter with the antagonist. It's important to note that at this point, you don't introduce new characters after this point. So you're not going to be introducing new characters in Act 3, of your story. I think the only real exception to that is if you have an ongoing series, and perhaps there's some weird twist where a character comes in Act 3, but they're going to carry over to the next installment. Maybe you could argue that. But in general, you don't do that. So that's how this structure is. So if you notice, again, pointing to this line here that I'm kind of outlining in blue, this is where the stage of your hero's development is here. And if you follow this plan, if you're putting together a game for your RPG, for example, Ella, I can turn it over to you and let you comment on that. Maybe you could comment about how you as a GM would use something like this.
Yeah, setting up a story in an open world is very difficult because you have to account for people making real life, sort of decisions, and sometimes they might not fall into your inciting incident, and they might not, fall into your conflict or your low point. And the important thing is to guide them, no matter what, towards the story progressing, forward. It's about being on your toes. Maybe that inciting incident didn't work, the one that you had planned, but maybe there's another one. So maybe you're trying to go to a village and the inciting incident is that orcs attack, but maybe they don't go to the village at all, and instead you have to ambush them with the orcs, or whatever it is. You just have to continue any way that you can, because that's what these stories are. If Simba, if Mufasa didn't die, an inciting incident would still happen to Simba. It still would have happened one way or another, because that's the destiny of his character, is that, he's meant to go through these things. And so it's the same with being a GM as well, is that you have to, sort of guide the story and the characters in the same style. They still have to go through a story, because otherwise it's unsatisfying at the end. You get everything you want and you're still this amazing hero from start to finish. It doesn't quite it doesn't feel as good as, going through plot points and stuff. And that's why we have stuff like backstory, height, weight, age. All of this stuff that seems really unimportant is actually very important, because it tells us so much about who the characters are. and it leads into their background and their life, which is totally important, when we're building these kinds of stories.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. I'm glad you said what you said about that, because I think that's the problem with a lot of like modern storytelling, especially with um, movies that try to elevate when this might be controversial what I'm saying, but I'm going to say it, but I think it's true. I think there's a lot of truth to it. There's a lot of movies where they will try to, like, in the effort to create like strong female characters, they will create movies that the female character has nothing to overcome. She's like really perfect from the start. And
Yeah.
you don't that doesn't make a strong female character. That makes a perfect female, right? Which is not that's not a humans are not perfect. And what makes movies fun to watch is our ability to put ourselves in the character's shoes, experience what they experience, right? Good strong characters regardless of gender have to go through a character arc. That's why you watch a movie or read a book.
Mhm.
You want to see them go through that growth and that change. And if they don't go through these things, they what's the point? There's no change. A you're watching a statue, right? And no one perfection is actually alien to us as human beings. We find perfection to be unnatural, because that's just not the natural state of things.
Yep.
So that's just my little my little thought on that. Um, how when you when you put together a campaign, Ella, what are like your do you have a checklist? Do you have um like your best practices? Like what's your favorite way of doing it? Like what's your favorite approach?
um I always start with a theme, something that I want the characters, that I hope that the characters will learn. Um, like in the tutorial game, for example, the one that's going to be released pretty soon to our beta testers, the theme is learning how to interact with other karma specialties. Because escape artists don't necessarily get along with ink fighters, and
Hmm.
ink fighters don't necessarily get along with special agents. And yet, I've put them in a situation in which they're all sort of in this one big building together enjoying something, and yet how do they sort of enjoy it without tearing at each other's throats, and then there's an event that happens that causes everybody to sort of work together, and it's like, how do you suddenly come together with people that you don't know, either for the greater good or for your, at least for your own safety, and survival, and how do you trust people? And so I always start with a theme. What do I sort of want the players to get out of it, whether or not it's the players or characters that get something out of it. And then I always go through and I just sort of write backwards. I always do what I want to happen at the end. um, at the end of the tutorial game is actually and going into a flux destiny for the first time. So that's like the something that happens. It's not like a big spoiler because there's stuff that happens within the flux
Hmm.
destiny, but that's like the main event at the end that everybody's waiting for. And yet it's not quite in the way that you hope that it would be. And so that's always where I start, and then I work backwards. Why is it more fulfilling to do that at the end instead of the beginning? And so then I have to um, do that, and I work backwards from there and think what would be satisfying to work up to that. And for the tutorial game, it's very difficult because it's meant to be something that's not necessarily super story driven, because people are just exploring their powers and stuff, and yet there still is a story within it. There still has to be um, at least a little bit, because then it's not quite so satisfying. There's people to help, there's things to do, there's powers to explore. So it's a little bit different, but in a typical game, I always try to figure out the villains and bad guys first, because they they obviously are such a through line within the story, whether or not it's an external thing, like just like the environment, getting somewhere, or whether it's an actual bad guy. And then I just like to throw fun characters in, like who can I bring into this that will add more than I thought, and can they help lead the theme that I'm trying to get? And often or not, they do. I always think like, oh, I don't need extra people. I don't need people to help me. And then it turns out like, well, yeah, you did need a kid or a robot or somebody to, like balance out the story, because it's not just about the world or the universe. Sometimes it's about people. So that was a
You
really
know,
long-winded answer,
no,
but
no. Actually, you said several points there that I think, like, I started nodding my head like really strongly, because like you're speaking my language, because I'm very much two things. You said many things that were great, but I want to comment on two of them. One of them being that writing backwards is something I do too.
Mhm.
And this kind of, you guys hear me talking about retconning a lot, how much I hate it. And writing purposefully writing backwards allows you to write purposely, because when you write with the end in mind, everything you do, all the foreshadowing and everything you set up, is in service of the climax of the movie, right? Or of the story. And the climax has to be satisfying, right? So, and it's only satisfying with when you set up, when you do all this setup that leads you there, you can feel the connection from start to finish. So writing the story backwards means writing with the end in mind. And I think that was, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think that's I certainly do that. Even if you don't know exactly how all the mechanics are going to work, at understanding the state of things at your climax will help you write toward it, you know.
Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned too was, you were talking about your characters and villains, and I am of the mindset that your story is only as good as your antagonist. And an antagonist can be a person, it can be a force of nature. Like if you watched Armageddon, that movie from the 2000s, the meteor movie, it wasn't a person who was the antagonist, it was the comet that was going to hit Earth. So it doesn't have to be a person. Um, the most I won't say much about Flux Destiny because I don't want to actually spoil things. But let me just say that for the antagonist, this particular character, I think I spent way more dedicated time to than any other character. Um, and when you end up getting to see all and Ella knows, she's seen behind the curtain, so she's seen the amount. It may be even overkill, but Flux Destiny is a 7-book series, so there's a lot, right? So the amount of care and backstory that went into it was to give the protagonist a strong antagonist to work against. If you want your character to go through the arc that we were talking about earlier, you have to make it very uncomfortable for them, right? So that I feel
Well,
really
yeah.
strongly about that.
And villains are the protagonists of their own story. So they
Yes.
have their own arc, and they feel, often, unless they're just evil, just for fun, which can totally happen and is a valid, villain plot. But many villains, especially nowadays, are their own heroes, or have some sort of justification, and so they have their own arcs. It just happened to be that instead of rising up at the end, they stayed in their, before the, what's it called, like their despair moment. Instead of rising out of that, they just stayed in it, and then decided to make a, that was their new inciting incident, because it just is a cycle for them. Instead of coming out of it heroic, they've come out of it, a different way. And so they think that they're still in their hero's story, and so that's why villains are are so important, and especially for the villains, like the villains in Flux Fantasy are going to be just as robust. Like they're going to have character sheets. They're going to have intricate backstories and things that are important to them, and likes and dislikes and things that make them happy and people that they love, because that's the way that they are. We're not talking about like a fantasy world in which there's like dragons and stuff that you could just slay and are just evil because they want to eat you. We're talking about people. We're talking about robots that have ideas and thoughts, and that could be really tricky to villainize. But yeah.
I love what you said, because when you talk about how an antagonist is the protagonist of their own story, um, the complexity of the not every antagonist has to be complex, right?
Yeah.
Like, I say that because I was just going on and on about how much I spent on the development of the antagonist for the Flux Destiny series, because that's the kind of antagonist that was necessary for this story, right?
Right.
You can have a spectrum of antagonists. You can have ones that are just like, cartoony, mustache twirling villains, right? That are just evil
Yeah.
for evil's sake. And that's okay. That's okay to have. But you have to have a properly polarized antagonist for what your story calls for. Um, so like a lot of times when you look at going back to Disney examples, a lot of the Disney stories usually are not very deep in terms of their antagonist motives, with the exception of stories like Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I think Hunchback of Notre Dame, which of course is the Victor Hugo novel, like Claude Frollo is a very complicated character.
Yeah.
And when that movie came out, um, I actually saw it in the theater. That's how old that movie is. I saw that movie in the theater. Um, that it was Frollo was a very different Disney villain. We weren't used to seeing conflicted Disney villains like that, and that particular kind of villain. And Frollo justified his actions using religion, right, and the church, but really he was doing it for himself out of lust for Esmeralda. So it's a very complicated character, right? And that's appropriate for that story. You don't need that kind of villain for a Goofy movie, right? Like a
Right.
Goofy movie, um, you know, that's interesting. In Goofy movie, the antagonist, if you think about it, the antagonist in the Goofy movie is, I would argue, have you seen that movie? A Goofy
Yeah.
movie? Okay. All right, what is who is the what is what or who is the antagonist? It's either, you could almost argue, no, it's not. I would say it's the race against time. Like, what is the antagonist? Is it time?
Yeah. The antagonist is the the hourglass. Yeah, to keep sand from slipping through your hand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That he's trying so hard to keep things under glass that it actually, speeds up the process. He's Oedipus. He's
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So you can see in that example, it's not necessarily a person. It's a force of nature that they're dealing with, which is time, right? Because Max has to get to the concert and be on stage so that Roxanne can see him in that, and because he made a promise that he made a lie, not a promise. He lied that he couldn't go to her party because he was going to be at Powerline's concert, and
yeah,
so the antagonist is really the lie in the race against time, to pull off his lie convincingly, which he manages to do thanks to the help of his dad, which I thought was really cute. Now, Goofy movie is actually I've actually outlined that movie before, and that one follows this structure like almost perfectly.
yeah,
A lot of those Disney movies, a lot of those big movies like that will follow this structure like beat per beat. I can watch a movie. I kind of drive my kids crazy because I'll watch a movie and I'll go, and here comes the first plot point, and then it happens, and then I'll go, here's the midpoint, and they're like, "Daddy, stop it!" I'm like, and all hope is lost, like, and we'll go through each
yeah,
one, but it helps me understand. I love to take apart stories while doing it because it helps me like um, I love the challenge of like, well, what could have been done to make that better? That story,
yeah,
every story can be made better. Every story, regardless. When my books, can always be improved. Everything can always be improved. So anyway, uh, any questions? We want to take a couple questions before we. Um, Anyone have any questions about this or what we've been talking about, or about the RPG and storytelling advice that Ella or I can give you?
yeah. We're big. If you can't tell, we're big nerds about this. We really like this kind of stuff, and people who write stories know, they get kind of geeky about storytelling, because it's like, you know, it's its own language, and when you speak it, you know, and it's we all speak it. You know, that's the thing, is that we're all stories. We're all going through these things. You know, we're all about to hit our inciting incident or our midpoint or our, you know, despair. Like we're all about to hit those things. And it's what we do with those moments that, you know, propel us forward into heroes or villains, you know, a little bit.
Right.
So
Yeah. So Josh is asking, hello, Josh. I was looking at the comments. I didn't see them before, so I didn't know you were here. Hello. Uh, so you were asking, apart from Hugo, Marco, and Kaz, is there any other character that would be a main character that you haven't met yet? I like your little emote. um, jo- Josh got mad because I sent him a package and all it said was Josh on it. It had nothing except Josh, and I knew he'd have a meltdown over it. And I sent it to him in the mail, and all it said was Josh, and I knew that he would get pissed at that. But anyway, so the answer to that question is yes. There's several characters. One character you'll meet, her name is Andy, so she spells it with an Andi. She's the president of the school newspaper at Wolfgang, and she plays a really important part in the story. There's another character who I won't go into much detail about here, but ends up becoming Hugo's roommate when he gets to Wolfgang. This is another very important character. We start meeting members of the fortune telling club in this story that are introduced. We meet a couple of great escape artists. One whose name he goes by the stage name Tycoon. Tycoon is Marco's idol, and so we get to meet Tycoon. There are, if I were to say, who am I missing? I know there's someone I'm missing in all that. Oh, we meet some characters. I don't want to say because I'm going to accidentally start saying too much. I'm catching myself because you guys know how to get me talking, and I'll start spilling the beans, and I don't mean to, because I get super excited about it. But amongst those, there will be several other very important characters who have their own arcs in the story. And
yeah,
I'll say one last thing about that. One of the most difficult parts about writing a multi-book series like this, especially the first book in a series like that, is setting up those arcs from the very beginning and how those play through. And I have my own outlines for that, which of course I do in a spreadsheet, like a big geek that I am. So
yeah, I would say that it's kind of an ensemble. It's kind of an ensemble cast. You know, you don't really necessarily see that with all of the art that we produce. It feels really Hugo heavy, and that's just because we love Hugo so much. But there's lots of other characters.
Yeah. Oh my God. The reason it's so
So
Hugo
many.
heavy. Well, there's two reasons. There's two reasons why it's Hugo heavy when I do the art. One is that I can draw him really quick. Yeah, I know him so well. And two, you guys love him so much that it's unfair to the other characters because I just draw Hugo because you guys lose your mind every time I draw Hugo. So I draw him and he's fun to draw. And I'm not a very fast artist, so for me to get art out there, I do it for him. So it's mainly because of those, and it's me being a very slow, incapable artist. That's why.
No, don't say that about yourself.
Oh, Entity's asking the fish guys. So Alistair. So he was a pro and yeah, he's kind of like a mix from the story. He was he had his redemption right later in the story. So he was introduced as a sort of red herring in the story, and he ends up getting his redemption later in the story. Viper is a character that Katie is pointing out. This is a member of the Fortune Telling Club that you will get to see as well. So, yeah, and they were roommates. And I love Entity. Entity's vibe has like matched very quickly and fast with our group here. So I like I love you guys in your snarky comments. You're very funny. And they were roommates, I swear. That's Mark Hugo's roommate, I swear. What else we got here? Any other questions?
Yeah, asking us plot-based questions gets more spoilers, so you know.
Katie has usually been pretty good at stopping me when I talk too much. She tells me, you know, she tells me when I'm starting to talk too much. She's been very good at that. I may not be very happy with Marco, but he didn't deserve what the fish did to him. No, he didn't. He didn't. He didn't deserve that. Poor Marco. You got. I keep telling you, I'm putting my money where my mouth is because when you get to see Marco in this book, Jessica, you're gonna really regret all the terrible things you've said. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ella, do you have any like final tips or comments or anything like that you want to give about the RPG and setting up like because the beta's coming up, so
Yeah.
maybe there's some things people need to start doing to prepare. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I would say that you guys are doing a great job, like asking questions in the Discord channel about like campaigns and stuff. If you're planning on writing your own campaign, asking questions like that are great because we can answer them right away and kind of steer you in a good direction. Um, yeah, the I think you guys are really gonna like the RPG. There's we're putting a lot of work into it, like the map and all of that is coming out soon, and all of that needs world building, right? It's a whole world, it's not just like one little area. And so with every new character that comes out, with every new thing, there's new lore to it, and you guys adding stuff and asking questions is so helpful. And yeah, I would just say with the beta coming out, we're also hoping to have um like a game that you can play like one player. So the more characters that you build, the more that you can play. The more that you can also just do on your own. I would say if you really want to get started, obviously do the character sheet, but then read the lore. Like really read like the wiki, read, look over the new map that's going to come out, watch the videos, like listen to the live streams and stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that ties into the world that's like we're building because of Flux Fantasy. The Ink Fighters were basically like nothing before, and so now they're a pretty big deal. And so, if there's characters or things that you're interested in, like let us know, and we want to build them into the world. So,
Yeah, no, those are great points. And entity to answer your question, so the that Fortuna's Rings book was like the pilot book, so it really doesn't fall into the continuity of the mainline series, which is the next book I'm writing, which is the first canonical one of the 7 books. So the events that happen there don't really affect this book, this series going forward. So everything going forward is the canon series on it. So naturally, the Hugo's Taurus is of course plays a big part in the story, just like it does for any of the escape artists. So, um, is the Hanto Union going to be part of this upcoming book? Not of this upcoming book. Um, I have not. I have not figured yet. Although I know how the series is going to flow and I know how it ends. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit in a major encounter with the Hanto Union in there. I don't know. I'll see. I'm still working on that. So
yeah, I would say for Flux Fantasy side that it's not in the first story, but as the game expands, it will most certainly play a key role at some point, because it is a whole group of people.
yeah, it doesn't mean that you won't run into them in the main
Mhm.
story, like that there won't be Hanto characters. It just means that I I don't think they're going to go there in the main story to actually go to the country. That would probably be explored like Ella was saying in the RPG or in other spin-off stories that happen in the Flux Destiny universe would happen there. So I see Josh's like disappointed glaring emoji in the chat. So I want to make sure he knows that don't worry, I'm going to take care of you. Don't worry. Yes. See, look, he's
Yeah, there's
very
lots
angry.
of. We're hoping to put out lots of content. I mean, just like we really like to write this story. I mean, more than just from Chris too. Like we're hoping to put out more and more content, like Flux Fantasy based content that's more canon to the world. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So like you guys are about to be flooded with content, and especially with Flux Fantasy, and we're so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. She really hits the nail on the head on that. Is that I wanted to design the universe in such a way that we could tell many different stories in it, and that other writers could do it too. It wouldn't be just me. That I would set the universe and I would set the main story, but then beyond that, we would have other writers who would write other adventures. You'll have other people going through, and that's why we spent so much time too, like developing the map. I'm actually about to release the updated Fortuna map that is going to show some significant changes because I've actually moved countries out of the region because I've moved them to other parts of the world. Fortuna basically stays the same, but I've kind of moved some of the neighboring ones around because I wanted to establish the entire globe so that we could tell lots of different stories. The characters could come from different diverse backgrounds, but that you could also have stories told in different countries with their own forms of karmistry and their own histories and their own uh, difficult things that are happening to them. And to do that, I had to create a stage big enough that it would allow that. So I would see it no different than something like if you look at Star Wars, for example, or Star Trek. These are giant literal universes, right? There's many planets, there's many civilizations, and you can tell and explore all sorts of stories in each of these. I don't think you're going to see an intergalactic Flux Destiny story. I think it's all going to take place on this Earth. But another universe, when we tell another story someday, which I would like to do a sci-fi space one. I'd like to do one of those one day. So that's on my list.
Yeah, and we're talking about timelines too. That a massive timeline that you guys have no idea about. And it's going to be so fun. And we say all this because we want you guys to write stories. We want you to go out and like Flux Destiny enough to write your own campaigns and your own stories. And if you want a story all in the Honto region, then you should do it. Like you should write your story, and because we love to see it, and there's stuff that inspires us in there, as well.
That's such a great. I love that you said that. That's so true. So Josh, you can have your Mer People Flux Destiny story to your heart's content. It can all be that, if you wanted. And I see your comments here. Yes, I'm flexing my powers by moving literal countries around. So, you better make a sacrifice to the Flux God over here. Um, or I'll move your country. I'll move your country around. Well, Ella, I had a great time talking with you about this. I hope you guys in the in our Patreon here enjoyed this little story lesson. I'm going to do more about these, and we're going to do OC workshops and storytelling workshops as we go forward to help you guys in the development of your games for Flux Fantasy, and also for you as writers of your own. If you're telling your own stories, we'll be able to help you understand how to structure and deliver a story that people want to read. So, thank you, Ella. Thank
Yeah, of
you,
course.
everyone who's come and joined us at this time. Let us know what you think about this time too. We did it a little earlier today. We're experimenting with different times to do lives to kind of see what works for folks. So we thought, let's try 4 Central and see how that goes. If it's too early, let us know, and we'll adjust next time. But thank you guys, as always, for your support and for supporting the Patreon and what we're doing with this little big universe, and for all your love. So we will talk to you guys soon. See you in the server. Bye.